Folks hear me? Yeah? Okay. So I'm coming from north of Philly, New York City, and again, my name is Reina Gossett, and I work with two organizations, Queers for Economic Justice and Transforming Justice. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about both of them and about how we envision all of our organizing work. At Queers for Economic Justice, I work in the Welfare Project, and part of my work is working with the Welfare Warriors, which is a collective of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and gender nonconforming folks who have or are currently low income. And we're working to make the welfare system more accountable through direct action, through coalition building, and political education. And knowing that the economic policies within the neoliberal agenda in New York City are not about valuing our bodies and our lives, and so that we need to both push back against the welfare system, against the neoliberal agenda that we're dealing with on our day-to-day, but also create something else. Also share resources, also develop our own resources. So that's part of a little bit about what I do at Queers for Economic Justice. And at Transforming Justice, which is a network of formerly imprisoned trans women and gender variant folks and trans men, we worked together and we started in 2007 to abolish the prison industrial complex. And so we, in both organizations, understand that we're living whole lives, right? And that being queer, and being trans, and being gender variant is informing our material condition, right? Is informing whether or not we're being arrested, whether or not we're resisting police violence, is informing whether or not we're in the welfare line every day or we're in the shelter system. So that's a really short, brief overview of the two organizations and the work that I do.
Is this mic working? So my name is Yasmin, and I am the Leadership Development Director at Fierce. How many folks have heard of Fierce? Great, all right, so we got a room full of people who can help talk about our work. So Fierce is an organization that was founded in 2000, and it was founded actually by a group of young people, primarily folks of color, but it was multiracial at the time, including white queer youth. And it was folks who were being really deeply politicized by the organizing work that was happening around police violence in New York City. So it was during a time of mass mobilizations around the killing of Amadou Diallo and the brutalizing of Abner Louima. So there's a lot of organizing happening around police brutality and police violence in New York City. And queer youth, particularly queer youth of color, we're feeling like the opportunities in New York City for queer youth to come together were a lot around support and services, but not around organizing around the root causes of the issues that were affecting people's lives, and also even giving people an opportunity to take action and do organizing work. So queer youth decided that they wanted an organization to do organizing work together, and Fierce emerged out of that. So we are, how old now? 9 years? Or 9 years old now, and a lot of our work focuses on the West Village, which if you don't know, the West Village in New York City is a neighborhood that is, part of the gay liberation movement, and that it's a historic gay neighborhood in New York. And since the late 80s, it's been a neighborhood where a lot of queer youth of color, a lot of low-income youth and homeless youth have gone to kind of seek refuge and be able to build family and build circles of friends and community, to be able to live, to be able to hang out, to be able to be queer and express themselves and their gender, to vote, to dance, to catwalk, all kinds of things. It's a really, really important neighborhood for our community, and the only neighborhood in which folks from all over New York City, all 5 boroughs, come together to congregate. And in 2001, the West Village, there's a pier in the West Village called the Christopher Street Pier, which has been the primary place in which people have hung out. And in 2001, it was shut down for redevelopment, and it was developed by kind of a private-public partnership with New York City and this corporation, which now is called the Hudson River Park Trust. And so the pier was shut down for 2 years, and it was redeveloped. And basically, it was like a rundown, abandoned pier, and then it turned into this beautiful park, which they called sort of an oasis for all of New York to enjoy. But clearly, it's not a space for all of New York to enjoy, because there's been an increase in policing, a lot of tension and harassment of queer youth of color who hang out in the area, and there was a lot of policies that were initiated afterward to try and kind of kick queer youth out of the neighborhood. And so Fierce's work really focuses on thinking about gentrification and public space as queer issues, as also as youth issues, and looking at organizing and sort of mass movement building as key strategies for building the power and leadership of LGBTQ youth of color.
All right, so thank you for those sort of introductions to your work. If we want to get a little bit further, I was wondering if someone or many of you could start talking about how the work that you're doing and the way that you're considering whole selves with your constituencies, with yourselves, and the work that the activism that's emerging, how does that relate to sort of the mainstream, what's considered the mainstream LGBTQ movement, and sort of the agendas put forward on the national front, and how does it sort of relate to that?
So I think that issue is particularly interesting to me because it, of course, for economic justice and with the welfare warriors, and also at Transforming Justice, we know that we're inheriting a really radical history, right, of queer liberation, of gender self-determination, and that we know that we're not living single-issue lives, right, and we're not living single-issue politics. So I think one of the things that we hold dearly in New York is that, we remember, and folks who are part of Queer for Economic Justice, Amber was asking how many folks in the room know someone who is, 60 or, older than 45. And because Queer for Economic Justice is really centered intergenerational relationships, we have folks who are part of a real rich history, right, and who were there at Stonewall. But one of the things that we also remember is a year after Stonewall, in 1970, the first anniversary of Stonewall, queer liberation planners marched from Stonewall to the New York Women's House of Detention, which is right in the West Village, just a couple blocks, yelling, "Free our sisters, free ourselves," right? Folks knew in 1970 that we couldn't be living as queer people single-issue lives, that folks who were incarcerated in the New York Women's House of Detention were part of our community, right? So that work around prison reform and prison abolition and the anti-prison movement needed to be our own, because that was our experiences, that was our lives. And so at Queer for Economic Justice, we know that that's part of our really rich history, and rather than thinking that we need to expand LGBT issues, we need to remember, we think. We need to reclaim our lineage, we think. We need to talk about our stories, we think, and we need to talk about our history, we think, because we come from such a radical tradition. So one of the ways that we do that is by organizing. And so I want to talk a little bit about how we conceptualize and think about organizing and the principles of our work. And then I want to talk a little bit about how our work exists in this really radical tradition. So at QEJ and the Welfare Warriors, one of our really core principles is that people most affected by an issue, whether it's being on welfare, whether it's being in the shelter system, whether it's being formerly incarcerated, are the most capable of organizing around it, right? So that our leadership needs to be folks who have lived through the shelter system, or have, are currently accessing welfare benefits, or have been incarcerated, and that in order to have a real vibrant organizing movement, those folks need to be at the center of our movement, need to be the center of our leadership, and that means we have a real serious commitment to leadership development.